Well, good morning, everyone. Pastor Corey Rowan here with Yorksville First, Pleasant Grove, and Tippecanoe United Methodist Church, bringing you another devotional on the Lord's Prayer. And our verse for today is Matthew 6, verse 13. And the Lord's Prayer continues, "And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever. Amen." And so this brings us to the end of the Lord's Prayer. And just as kind of a note, the ending of the Lord's Prayer where it says, thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever and ever. Amen. You won't find that in all translations of the Bible because there's some disagreement on whether or not the original text had that ending. So it's not a bad ending, it's just not one that all the Bible authorities agree on as to whether or not it was in the original text. So just as kind of a note there, some of the Lord's Prayer ends different than the others, but the official Lord's Prayer ends that way. For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever. Amen. But today's message, I want to focus on this idea of God leading us into temptation. Because that sounds like a scary one. That doesn't sound like an encouraging morning devotional. God leading us into temptation. And the wording there for lead is kind of confusing, but understand this. The Bible makes it very clear that God does not tempt us to sin. When we are tempted to sin, it is not from God, it is from Satan. So God does not lead us to temptation. And I know the Catholic Church changed that. It doesn't say anymore that God lead us not into temptation. But you have to understand, God is over everything. I mean, look at the book of Job. God orchestrated Job's testing. God allowed Satan to test Job. God allowed Satan to work Job over, because Satan wanted to get Job to sin against God. And so while God didn't specifically lead Job or lead the temptation against Job, God set Job on a path and allowed Satan to tempt him. And so for the author to say, lead us not into temptation, he's not saying that God is going to tempt you, but he's saying, God, lead us in the path away from temptation. Don't lead us to where we'll be tempted. Lead us in a path away from temptation and deliver us from evil. So our message for today is to pray for God's guidance. Pray for God to lead you in a path that doesn't lead to temptation, because there's certain paths in our lives that will lead to temptation. I mean, if a perfect example of if you have a porn addiction and you are walking on a path that leads you to be home alone with your laptop, that's a path that leads to temptation. And so the prayer there would be, God, lead me in a path that keeps me out of that temptation. Lead me in a path that keeps me around people, that doesn't give me a chance to tempt myself to that sin. And so, again, our message for today is, God, lead us not into temptation. Not that God tempts us to sin, but because God is over everything, we're asking him to lead us on a path where we won't be tempted, where Satan can't work us over, and deliver us from evil. And he will do that. Pray that prayer today. Amen.